Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, this is going to be my little breakdown of the UFC 281 fight card, mainly the main event between that of Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Now, my channel, of course, usually, for those of you that know, is not mainly a UFC commentating channel. It's not mainly overall about that, but I do know enough, at least in my opinion, to where I can commentate a little bit about it, especially about this fight, which I thought was going to be very particularly interesting. And we just seen, I believe, about a month ago, the former number one pound for pound fighter in all the UFC in Kamaru Usman. Overall, he ended up losing, of course, to a decently big upset in Leon Edwards, I believe, or Leon Edwards, however you pronounce his name, of course, the British fighter who had been in a very long wait for title contention. And we've seen Kamaru Usman, and in my opinion, his hubris get the best of him, his cockiness get the best of him, because I don't think that he was completely focused on Leon Edwards. I think that he thought that Leon Edwards was going to be very easy, and for some of those rounds, it did appear that he was somewhat easily picking apart Leon Edwards, or that he was clearly beating him. But of course, in the final round, he did not take his defense as seriously as what he needed to. And of course, he got hit, I believe, with a round kick straight to the temple. And that pretty much overall was goodnight, Irene. Well, Mr. Israel Adesanya, who, in my opinion, could have had the debate as the number one pound for pound fighter, right now I would probably say that it's Alexander Volkanovski, and I don't think that there really can be any debate about it anymore because Alexander Volkanovski is the only guy within the high pound for pound rankings that has not lost a fight within the UFC promotion. And on top of that, he pretty much has dominated everyone that he's fought, from Jose Aldo to excuse me, to Max Holloway to Chad Mendes, even though some of those fighters, of course, took some losses, but you have to give the man credit. And on top of that, I think that you can truly debate, at least when it comes to hand striking, maybe even leg striking as well, when you talk about the leg kicks and the tactical striking that Volkanovski delivers. I think you can debate that he is the all-around best striker in the UFC, but not to digress. Let's get in, of course, to the main topic of the situation between that of Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. And for those of you, of course, that did not overall end up hearing the news, Israel Adesanya, of course, ended up losing to Alex Pereira, I believe, by a fifth round TKO or by a fifth round knockout. I personally watched the fight myself. I was a little bit surprised, but I can't say that I was necessarily shell shocked. I did predict Israel Adesanya to win this fight by decision because I thought that Alex Pereira, in my opinion, would be a little bit too inexperienced. He came across to me as a fighter that, yes, he had a lot of power, but he was not going to throw a lot of volume, and I was pretty much correct in that assumption. There was a lot of times, in my opinion, to where he could have took advantages of throwing when Israel Adesanya was up against the cage, but a lot of the times he just looks for that perfect shot, almost a little bit like Deontay Wilder in the sport of boxing. And in my opinion, that usually is not going to get the job done. But because of the great power that Alex Pereira had, not only that, but probably his past experience against Israel Adesanya, if you want to debate that. And on top of that, overall, because Israel Adesanya, whether people want to admit it or not, even though in my opinion he is a great UFC fighter, he is a little bit flawed. And some people overall may not necessarily know what I mean here. And this is not me saying that he's trash or anything like that. Once again, I think that Israel Adesanya is clearly one of the greatest UFC fighters that I've seen. I don't know exactly where I would rank him. But a big problem with Israel Adesanya, at least from what I see, especially someone overall coming from a little bit more of a boxing background or certain things. One thing that I notice about a lot of MMA fighters, but Israel Adesanya especially, is that one of his main Achilles heels is that certain times when he is throwing strikes or even certain times backing up, he doesn't like to keep his hands up. And there's certain fighters all in all, and Deontay Wilder also has this same issue, and we've seen it against Tyson Fury. Deontay Wilder, a lot of the times when he is forced to be on the back foot, or even sometimes on the front foot, he really doesn't keep up his hands up effectively. But what he'll usually do is that he'll stick his lead hand within your face to kind of keep it as a distance ranger, and that can be a very good defensive maneuver. But a lot of the times when Deontay Wilder was against Tyson Fury on the inside, he didn't really know how to defend some of those incoming punches because he said, wow, this dude can actually compete with my reach. He can actually compete with my size. He can actually get around my power. He can get around my lengthy dimensions, and I don't really know how to counter that. And I think that Israel Adesanya came up with that a little bit as well. Now, some people may say, well, I personally believe that Alex Pereira just landed a lucky shot. Well, I don't think that it's really a lucky shot because when he landed the shot, it landed completely flush. And on top of that, Israel Adesanya kept his hands down, or overall, his hands were down. And that's something that, in my opinion, Israel Adesanya is going to have to work on. And that's also another part to why I wanted to do this video. Israel Adesanya, even though, once again, in my opinion, he is a decently great fighter, or a great fighter, let me put it that way, he is going to have to work on his defensive ability. I think that he has great offensive ability, but I think that the way to beat Israel, in my opinion, especially if you have decent reach and you can compete with him in terms of athleticism, and to be quite honest with you, I thought that the second Robert Whittaker fight was very, very competitive and a fight that could have went either way, but it is what it is. But the way to beat Israel, in my opinion, is to somewhat put the volume on him, to jab him, because Israel Adesanya does not avoid the jab very well. He just doesn't. Every single time a jab is thrown at him, he pretty much gets caught with it. I seen it in the Robert Whittaker fight. I seen it in the Kelvin Gastelum fight, and I seen the same thing in this fight. Now, in my opinion, Israel Adesanya, I thought, was clearly winning the fight. I thought he was at least winning the fight somewhere around 3 rounds to 1. Now, some of you may personally disagree with that. I had Israel as the busier fighter. I thought that he was winning the fight, but I'm not really surprised that he ended up getting knocked out. And the reason, once again, why I say that is because Israel, in my opinion, and this should be a warning to him, that if he is ever going to become champion once again, especially possibly beat Alex Pereira in a rematch, because in my view, this was a fight that he was winning until overall the flaws ended up biting him back in the ass and ended up causing him to get knocked out. What Israel is going to have to do is that he's going to have to work on his defensive style a little bit. And some people may say, what are you talking about? Israel is a very defensive style, or excuse me, he fights in a very defensive way. Well, there's a difference overall between being an actual great defensive fighter and fighting in a defensive way. Because there's certain fighters that, yeah, they can fight on the back foot and they may be able to, outreach their opponents because they have that height and reach. But when certain fighters overall are able to get on the inside, they don't really know what to do. And we've seen Israel Adesanya have a little bit of problems with that. I'm not going to claim that he's as limited as what Deontay Wilder was on the inside, because I've seen Israel Adesanya have quite a good offense on the inside, but the hands do need to be up. The hands do need to be up. And overall, once again, it's just a very, very big issue that I have personally noticed with Israel Adesanya. When I seen Kamaru Usman lose to Leon Edwards, I believe it was last month or whenever the hell it was, maybe a couple of months ago now, I think that Kamaru Usman overall had a defensive slip up, and I think all in all that pretty much was hubris. I think that he really was not looking at Leon Edwards. He was looking for Canelo Alvarez, because Kamaru Usman was, besides Colby Covington, he pretty much was dominating everybody so effectively. And now he put himself in a position to where he's going to have to really be spotless within that third match, because there's no guarantee that he'll win that match. We don't know what his confidence level is going to be. So it just is what it is. And now it's the same thing with Israel Adesanya. So Israel Adesanya, once again, in my opinion, very, very decent fighter. Great fighter, in my opinion. But once again, the defense is going to have to be overall a little bit better than what it has been. And what Israel knows how to do overall, and what Israel Adesanya, in my opinion, should do, is that he probably should take some tips from Alexander Volkanovski, or all in all, when it comes down to it, he probably should get some certain boxing lessons. Because some of these MMA fighters, once again, what I notice about them is that they don't really know how to use their lead hand overall to the most of their advantage. And I understand, to a degree that they have to overall fight in a different style, because you have to watch out for kicks and takedowns and all the other stuff. But the lead hand, when you're a striker, when it comes down to it, or when you're striking, excuse me, the striking overall, the lead hand oftentimes can be the most important punch. And once again, Israel Adesanya a lot of the times knows how to stick his lead hand in someone's face to blind them, or to use it a little bit as a distance judger. But once again, when he's chopped up against the ropes, his hands are almost never up. And I've seen this against Robert Whittaker. I've seen it against Kelvin Gastelum. He gets hit way, way, way too much for usually having that reach advantage. It just is what it is. Excuse me. That's just personally what I see with Mr. Israel Adesanya. And it's a little bit unfortunate, because I think that he's a great fighter. He's very greatly talented. But if he ever is going to become a champion, I believe, and possibly beat Alex Pereira in the rematch, because now Pereira is going to have the complete confidence advantage when it comes down to it. But if Israel is ever going to beat Pereira in a rematch, in my opinion, the defense is going to have to improve. And on top of that, he's also going to have to be a little bit offensive. I think a big part of the reason why Pereira also was able to finally get the knockout within the fifth is that, once again, you could tell that Israel was a little bit intimidated, not by just the power, but also by the height and the reach of Alex Pereira. When certain fighters finally get into the ring with a fighter that actually can compete with their physical dimensions, and we've seen with it, we've seen it in boxing, we've seen it in MMA, we've seen it time and time again. We've seen it with John Jones against Ovince St. Preux. We've seen it overall with John Jones against Alexander Gustafsson, at least the first time around. We've seen it with Deontay Wilder against Tyson Fury, and we've seen it in this fight. We also seen it with Conor McGregor, I believe, when he fought Dustin, at least overall in the rematch, when Dustin was finally able to get on the inside. When certain fighters, all of a sudden, that usually they mainly rely on that reach, and then all of a sudden, you can tell that certain flaws are exposed that once upon a time maybe were not, because they stopped, are fighting a style that maybe is a little bit tougher, or stepped up in competition. They start to say, oh shit, what do I really do now? And that's when you really start to see some of the defensive, inefficiencies or deficiencies. So hopefully Israel Adesanya, once again, when it comes down to it, learns from this experience, and hopefully he improves as a fighter. And of course, if you're a fan of Alex Pereira, of course you have to be happy for Alex Pereira. But in my opinion, it really was not the greatest performance. Not saying that it was not a tough fight for Israel, and of course he ended up losing, but I'm just talking about the majority of the fight. But I did think that Israel was winning this fight. I thought that Alex Pereira definitely could have used his lead hand more. If you're going to beat Israel, especially consistently, you have to use that lead hand. Now, he was able to beat Israel when it came down to it once again, but had he been a fighter that had been less physically talented, this may not have happened. So Alex Pereira, once again, he won the fight, but he also has to make certain improvements as well. His defense and his head movement especially have to be better, because had another 30 seconds happen, at the end of that round, overall round one, he probably would have been spark knocked out, because he nearly got knocked out within the first round. So his head movement and his overall, defense needs to be a little bit better. And he also needs to work on being a little bit active once again, in my opinion, in my view. And some may disagree, but Alex Pereira is once again another one of these fighters that looks for the one-shot bomb a little bit too often. Not saying that, once again, he had no offense, but he could have been a decent amount more active within this fight. A decent amount more active. And I thought that, had he really upped the ante, that not only could he have won this fight by knockout, which he did, he probably could have won this fight. He probably could have won the majority of the rounds. He could have been the one that was up 3-1 heading into the fifth, and then got the knockout on top of that, if he overall had a little bit more knowledge of the striking. And some people are going to say, what are you talking about? This man is a world-class kickboxer. Yes, but overall, once again, Israel, a lot of the times throughout this fight, was outstriking him. And that's because Israel is a little bit more experienced, I believe, in the UFC, and probably a little bit more in boxing. But once again, Israel is going to have to tune up on that defense. And Alex Pereira, what he's going to have to do, in my opinion, is also tighten up on the defense, tighten up on the head movement, or excuse me, what I say by tighten up is that he's going to have to be a little bit looser, try to work on the head movement. And I understand that head movement does not work the same in MMA as what it does in boxing, because, of course, it's different. You can't run into knees, you can't run into kicks. But still, Alex Pereira, some of the times, he was barely moving his head. And there was a couple of times to where he got hit overall, very, very flush. So it is what it is. So he does need to be careful. But overall, very interesting fight. And I thought that I would talk about this because the faults that I've been seeing with Israel Adesanya for a very long time, they finally came back to roost. The hens came back to roost. It just is what it is. And, once again, this is not me, overall trying to shit on Israel or anything like that. I think that he's a very, decently great fighter, or a great fighter, clearly. But overall, once again, this did show some of his deficiencies. And hopefully, overall, he is able to do a little bit better moving forward. But we'll see overall what ends up happening with that. I just thought that I would talk about that because that was very particularly interesting. Because this is now the second, or one of the top pound for pound fighters that I've now seen lose overall for a second time. And I just thought that it was interesting. That's not something that you truly see that often, at least in terms of boxing. But UFC, of course, is a little bit more of a precarious sport. But it is what it is. But it's going to be very interesting to see where Israel goes from here. Does a rematch happen? Does he end up facing Robert Whitaker for a third time? Does he move up to 205 pounds? What ends up happening here? But it is going to be very interesting if a rematch happens. Who is going to win that fight? Because I don't really know who I would favor. But at the moment, I probably would have to favor Alex Pereira. And the reason why that is because he has the confidence overall. And I'm not sure how Israel is going to be. And I'm not really sure overall how much tighter he's really going to be on the defense. Because a lot of the times when you have a fighter that was a world class champion, like what Israel Adesanya is, oftentimes they're a little bit too far gone to really improve much. That pretty much is their knowledge base. Whatever you see at that point in time is pretty much what you're going to get. At least in my view. That's just personally what I have seen in the past. And that's the same reason why I picked Tyson Fury to beat Deontay Wilder. But at the end of the day, my fight prediction was wrong. I did predict Israel Adesanya to win by unanimous decision. He was close, but at the end of the day, his deficiencies came home to roost. So it is what it is. So hopefully Israel is able to take this as a learning experience. And hopefully Alex Pereira is also able to take this as a learning experience. As for the other fights, at least the main fight that I'll talk about, I won't really talk about the Zhang Weili versus Carla Esparza fight. At least I believe that I'm pronouncing the girl's name correctly, the Chinese girl's name, who of course is a phenomenal fighter. I won't really commentate on that one because I didn't get to watch it. But as the Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler fight, the two fighters that I know very, very decently well, a very entertaining fight. Dustin Poirier, of course, is one of the better strikers in the UFC, who actually you can tell if you take a look at him, actually has decent boxing ability. Not saying that he's a world class boxer, but you can tell sometimes the way that he defends, and sometimes overall the way that he cross blocks, and the way that he moves, and the way that he keeps his hands up. Overall, that's what Israel Adesanya should have been doing up against the cage, when it came down to it. But a lot of the times he uses his height and reach so much that he doesn't feel that he needs to keep his hands up. And once again, it finally came back to bite him. So it is what it is. But Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler, just to end off on that note, that was a hell of a fight. Dustin Poirier, in my opinion, I just gave the first round because of what happened in that final minute. Nearly knocked Michael Chandler out. And then, of course, you get Michael Chandler the second round, in my opinion, because Dustin was not able to do anything. And Michael Chandler, no, he didn't do a lot of damage on the ground, but he had him on the ground pretty much for the majority of the time. And that's also a big part of the reason why I thought that Piotr Jan clearly should have beat Sean O'Malley on the scorecards. Sean O'Malley did do a little bit of damage, but in my opinion, Piotr Jan had him on the ground way too long and did damage on top of that. So it is what it is, but that's a story for another day or a conversation for another time, as I've already talked about that. But just to talk about the rest of that Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler fight, and I've been saying this about Michael Chandler for a very long time. In my opinion, and this is no offense to him, I think that he's a decent fighter, but in my opinion, he's really no higher grade than a B plus to A minus. And I'm not really even sure if I can put him on the A minus level because A minus, in my opinion, is probably around what Justin Gaethje is at. And Michael Chandler was not able to beat him. He was not able to beat Charles Oliveira. He was not able to beat Dustin Poirier. He pretty much has not been able to win any of the big 50-50 fights that he has been in, other than maybe Dan Hooker, if you really even want to count that one. So it it is what it is. But when it comes down to it all in all, I think Michael Chandler, I think that he's a guy that is a little bit unorthodox. I think that he gave Dustin a little bit of problems at the beginning because, you never know exactly what he's going to pull out. But as Dustin Poirier said, and I said the same thing, he doesn't throw straight. He throws a lot of looping punches. And you know who I would compare Michael Chandler to? Isaac Pitbull Cruz in terms of boxing. I made a couple videos about him within the past couple of days. And that's one of my things about Isaac Pitbull Cruz. Isaac Pitbull Cruz is another fighter, in my opinion. No, of course, this is boxing, to where he doesn't work off the jab very well. And that's why I predicted, in my opinion, that any fighter that he's going to fight that is clearly an A-grade fighter, he's mainly not going to beat those guys. Because you have to work well off your jab. That's what any all-time great fighter usually does. But it is what it is. But, I thought the fight was very particularly interesting. Michael Chandler is a guy to where he is a bit unorthodox. He is going to give you a little bit of trouble. But at the end, with those big 50-50 fights, he's going to lose a lot of them. Not necessarily because, he crumbles under the pressure. It's just really because that he doesn't have the fight IQ nor the fight skill. He doesn't have the defense. He doesn't keep his hands up whatsoever. And on top of that, a lot of his punches are advertised. He does have decent wrestling ability, but it's not on the same level as an Islam Makhachev or a Habib or anything like that. So he's never really going to be, in my opinion, the champion of the UFC. It just is what it is. So it's whatever. But I just thought that I would commentate on that. I thought that that'd be very particularly interesting. But it's going to be very interesting to see where all these fighters go from here. Was very excited to see this card. A very great card. Very great card. Certainly do not regret buying it. But let me know overall if you agree or disagree with some of the things that I stated, and overall what you thought about the fight and what you think about Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, and whoever else you want to commentate about. Because I did watch the whole card. But anyways, congratulations to Mr. Alex Pereira, Dustin Poirier, Zhang Weili, I believe, Dan Hooker, and I believe also, what was the man's name? Emmanuel Rodriguez, or whoever the man was that beat Frankie Edgar. The Frankie Edgar that has pretty much been washed up for the past 3 years. But hey, good on him. Overall, and please, Frankie, retire. Let's really hope that Frankie Edgar retires. Overall, great, all-time great fighter in my opinion. But goddamn, the man's been done now for 3 years. But we'll see overall what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Congratulations to all the winners, of course. Going to be very interesting to see what happens with this Alex Pereira Israel Adesanya situation, because of course Alex Pereira, in terms of complete promotions, he's now 3-0 against Israel, and he's knocked him out twice. So that has to affect Israel negatively in some sort of mental impact. But this is really going to show, if he does have a rematch against Alex Pereira, how truly great of a champion Israel Adesanya is. Because the greatest of champions, and I said a very similar thing about Canelo, the greatest of champions, when it comes down to it, yeah, they might get losses here and there, but they can adjust very quickly, or they can come back in a very big way. So will Israel be able to be able to beat, someone like Alex Pereira in the trilogy, or excuse me, in a second fight in the UFC? Who knows? Who knows? We'll see. Or will he go on and possibly lose to Alex Pereira and then possibly win the belt again? Will he become another Zhang Weili, or will he be a fighter that may be a TJ Dillashaw? We'll see. We'll see. It's going to be very interesting. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. That I will talk on that, and I'll talk to you all later.